Hi everybody. In this video I'm going to be attaching a tube thimble to the end of my winchline extension that I'm building. If you watched the end for end splice video, this is the section of rope that I took off and replaced with the orange Dyneema rope. In this video we'll be doing the eye loop for the thimble right here, and the process is almost the same for the end for end splice, with the measuring with the fids and your taper and everything. That's all exactly the same. The only difference is we're adding a tube thimble in the middle of our process here. So to begin with, we have our trusty fid. This fid is designed for a 3/8 inch rope. It's marked on here from Samson, 3/8 or 9 millimeters. It's just about 8 inches long. It's about 7.8 inches, I think, technically. And as I mentioned in the end for end splice video, what we need to do is we need to make a tail that is 3 fid lengths long overall, and we will measure that with a fid. So the first thing that we want to do is measure 1 fid length . We want to measure 1 fid length, and this is going to become the taper. You want to have a smooth transition when you're burying the rope inside the core. So for mark 1 at 1 fid length, and we need 3 fid lengths total, so the next mark 2 will be 2 fid lengths away. And make mark 2, just put 2 dashes on the rope. And this will be the end of the tail. So this whole length here is going to get buried inside the rope. This is also the your mark 2 is also the begin point of your eye. We'll feed it through. We'll make our other mark, and we'll do our final mark for the exit point. Before we pass the line through the thimble, to make it easier to work with the line without having the heavy thimble on the end, what I'm going to do is just start the taper now. Now this Dyneema rope is a 12 strand class 2 rope. We need to do a 50% reduction, so that means we need to remove 6 of the strands. You can see that the rope has this V pattern to it, so what we're going to do is mark one of these V's, and then we're going to skip one. We're going to mark another one, skip one, and finally on the third time we're going to mark a V. And what we're doing is we're marking each strand. So with 3 marks we'll have 6 strands marked, and by spacing every other V, we're allowing the rope to slowly, gradually step down along its length. And then finally at the end, for the past couple inches, we'll unbraid just the rope here, and we'll just cut it at a slight angle from one corner to the other if you were to draw an imaginary line across here. And that will also aid not only with protecting the inside of the rope, because if you were to have this hard 90-degree angle inside the rope, it'll chafe from the inside. From the outside your rope will look fine, but you'll actually be weakening it on the inside, and the rope can fail at that point unless you're vigilant on inspecting your rope, but still you don't want to have this hard of an edge on the inside of your rope. So from mark 1 we're going to the end, just the short fid length, and I always like to start with the first complete V. So I'm going to mark a V, skip one, mark, skip, mark. So there you can see how I've marked it. This is the tail that we're going to taper at the end. Now with your fid on the other end, the non-smooth end down here, this is good for kind of just poking underneath the strand, and it lifts it up. And this makes it easier to slide your scissors underneath to cut. Now when you cut, you want it to be right along here where the strand comes out. if you cut it up here and you have this little tail section sticking out, it'll act as a barb when it gets fed into the core of the rope. So you don't want to have any extra dangling strands when you cut your rope. So when you pull it out, you can kind of see there's a little mark that's been made just from the twist and the bite of the fiber, and you can use that as a guide to cut the strand. So with your scissors, you just find roughly where it was. I like to get right on where this little serrated portion is of the line. Make your cut. Hold on to the loose end so it doesn't get too bunched up in your hand, and then pull out one of the strands. And you can see how the cut follows the strand that's just over top. So we're going to do the same thing with the other 5 strands. Make sure we get everything. You don't need to pull it out too far, just enough to get the scissors in there. And while you're doing this, it's always good to remember that this is something that you can definitely do on the trail. Even if you don't necessarily have a synthetic winch line on your winch right now, knowing this skill might be able to save your buddy's rope if he's got one out on the trail. It's really simple to do once you just remember your measurements. There are a couple other things that you can do instead of the lock stitch. Well, excuse me, you still need to do the lock stitch on the berry, but there's also a lock that you can do called a locking brummel, which I'll do in another video. But that basically keeps the line from pulling out of the eye, even if there's no lock stitch. When you do this, make sure you're getting the entire strand inside. You don't want to cut half the strand. You want to cut all of the fibers that make up the strand. And we're pulling out the last strand. These scissors are really good. I've tried using, just regular store-bought kind of scissors, and they work, but it takes a lot more effort to get through this strands. Okay, I'm going to unbraid these. Like that, and I'm just going to cut right across like that. Some of the benefits of using Dyneema or SK75 or Amsteel Blue, as they're all known, is it's very resistant to any sort of chemicals like engine oil, coolant, things like that. It's very lightweight, obviously, one of the main benefits. It actually is so light that it'll float on top of water. Okay, we now have our taper. What I'm going to do is just put a little bit of tape on the end to make it easier to feed through the thimble. It also makes inserting into the end of the fid a little bit easier. And when you do this, you just need, maybe 2 wraps of tape. If you don't have a fid and you're out in the field and you have to do this, you can do this sort of a technique and just tape up the end to insert into the core of the rope. You do need to remember the measurements though. 8 inches for your taper and 2 additional fid lengths for a total of 24 inches for that. So if you don't have a tape measure, or if you're using a ballpoint pen, which is usually a little bit shorter, you can always use a dollar bill as your measurement tool. It's about 6 inches long, so take $1.50 bills to err on the longer side, and you can use that to make your marks as well. So now what we're going to do is feed a rope through the tube thimble, and we're going to pull it through until we see our mark 2. Keep an eye on where it is. So here's our berry. You want about one rope length. One rope width distance from the outside. And kind of cinch down your thimble. And then from here, just for reference, we will mark our second mark 2. Just should anything happen to the thimble, it's also good to make sure that your lock stitching is working. As long as your 2 lines line up when you do your lock stitch, should one day you see that they've shifted, one goes up, one goes down, that probably means that your lock stitching has somehow failed. And so even though you don't have to have the second mark on here for your measurements, it's good as a visual guide to make sure that you still have the correct bury, because this is what actually gives the rope, the splice, its strength, is burying the tail inside of the core. Acts much like a Chinese finger trap toy when you're a kid. So with that, you can measure 3.5 to 4 fid lengths from the other Mark II, the second one further along, and this will let us know how far we need to do our bury, and marks the exit point of the fid. 3 and 4. And for the exit point, I draw a line all the way around the rope, because you'll see when it's time to do this that it's difficult. You're twisting the rope all around and trying to find your exit point. So having this mark, you can find it anywhere, and it also differentiates it from your Mark 1, which is I use just the dash for. Now we're ready to attach our fid. Okay, we're ready to start burying the tail. I like to get the tape started on the fid. Insert the tail. You'd want to avoid getting any little peaks, any little sharp peaks with the tape, because the the core of the rope can catch on that as you insert it. Also, when you insert this, you may find that the manufacturer has put a little tracer line inside. A lot of times it'll be red and green and made up of just a lot of little tiny fibers, but overall it's very thin. There's no structural integrity or strength added to that. It's just part of the manufacturing process. So sometimes your tape or the fid can get caught on that little tracer line. So it's totally fine if you want to pull that out beforehand, just because it'll just get in the way and get all tangled up, and you may not even be able to finish the bury without having to remove that anyways. So I'm going to snug the line up. So our Mark II is about 1 rope width away from the tube thimble, and I'm going to bird cage it up, insert the fid into the core of the rope, and just kind of bird cage it and push the rope in there. And you'll just kind of get a feel as the fid starts to slide through the center. And once you get it in far enough, you hold the taped end of the fid, push the rope on top, squeeze the tip of the fid, and then just pull the rope through. And just look for your last mark right here. Bring the fit out. You want to bring the entire fit out and the exposed end of the rope. And then double check that you've got just enough slack down here. I'm going to pull this through. We'll remove the fid. We'll get rid of the tape. Always make sure you remove all of the tape. Again, that can cause damage on the inside of the rope that you may not see. So I'm happy that the two Mark IIs are still in line with each other. Make sure that the center of the split here of the rope where they join is in line with the center of the thimble. Hold the thimble firmly in this hand, and then with this one just milk it all the way down, and you'll see the tail gets sucked up inside. As you're doing this, just double check and make sure there's no sudden drastic changes in rope diameter. The first 16 inches where we made the two fid measurements should be the same, and then the last 8 inches you should feel just barely the taper and just barely the end of the tail right here. There's just enough slack here for the thimble to move around, but not enough to where it's going to pinch the rope on the inside of the tubes. And from here we'll make our lock stitch, which I have demonstrated in another video.